Hello YouTube, this is Alexis, the Transgender Duelist, and today I'm bringing you a deck from my good friend over here, petercob. Say hello.
Hi.
So we're going to be doing a Sphinx deck of all things, and we're not talking about the Pyramidal Light Sphinx, we're talking about this thing here, Exxod Master of the Guard, which is like the absolute worst Sphinx support in the world, but for some reason we decided to make a deck for it, and by some bloody miracle his deck beat a few of my decks, so I decided to make this a deck profile. petercob, that's your cue to get started.
Oh, so, um, yeah, Sphinxes. Technically, you could call them anti-meta Sphinxes, but they're not built really to combat the meta in a serious way. But there are cards in here that deal with the meta. Um, so, starting things off, we've got two copies of Cryo Sphinx. Probably the weakest Sphinx in the deck because its effect is pretty much useless unless you already have Guardian Sphinx established on the board, or you have, if you're running compulsory, then something like that. But other than that, it's just really a 2400 defense wall. But the good thing about this card is that Giant Rat can special summon it from the deck, which is okay because getting that out on your opponent's turn, provided they have nothing else to kill it with, is actually pretty good. One copy of Exxod. We're running it because it is a Sphinx deck, and I wanted to put it in, but I acknowledge it's not a very good card because it does require already having a Sphinx out, which requires to tribute summon in the first place. However, again, Giant Rat into Cryo Sphinx into Exxod is something you can potentially do.
And also while we're there, the effect starts a chain. I learned that a while ago. This thing is before problem-solving card text, so do keep that in mind for anybody who wants to actually try using this deck.
Yeah. And then 3 copies of Fossil Diner Howl Cephalio, because it's Fossil Diner, it stops your opponent playing the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! For special summons. And it kind of fits in with the deck really well because the whole deck revolves around the stalling until you get a Sphinx out, and things like that.
Doesn't it?
3 copies of Giant Rat. Go on.
I was gonna ask, does the Fossil Dino ever conflict with a Giant Rat or... Well, actually, I think Giant Rat and Scapegoat are the only things you have that can even special summon.
Not usually. I don't normally find Fossil Diner being an actual problem because if I have Fossil Diner already on the board, then I'm going to be I'm either going to tribute summon it off for Sphinx if I don't need it anymore, or if I still do need it, then I'm just going to have it in attack or defense mode, doing what it does best. If I've already got an established board, such as I have 2 Mindless Radiants out and then I summon a Fossil Diner, I'm in pretty good shape because at that point I've got a 2200 beat stick that doesn't let you play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!
No, so I just want to point out something I just noticed. You can special summon Fossil Dino off a Giant Rat if you wanted to.
You can. If you need an easy way to get the Fossil Dino out, Giant Rat is also another way of doing it. Which brings us on to Giant Rat. In case no one has actually ever used this card before, if it's destroyed by battle, you get a special summon Earth with 1500 or less attack in attack position. The only downside of the card is that it specials in attack position. Everything else on it is okay and fine because you can just set this. Your opponent's going to run into it, and you're going to be running things like Solemns and that to stop them from blowing up with effects. They're going to run into it, and then suddenly you've got yourself either a Cryo Sphinx, a Fossil Diner, or you can actually summon another Giant Rat if you really wanted to.
Oh, so I just want to point out that I just noticed he has a skull in his hand. I wonder, did he kill?
I think a goblin, because it is a giant rat.
Poor goblin.
Anyway, two copies of Gigantis. Actually, not a bad card for this deck, and it's okay for like a lot of different Earth decks if they have a lot of Earths in grave that you can use. So Gigantis, again, a card people may not have come across before. You special summon it first by banishing 1 Earth from your grave, which is easy to do, especially if you have a giant rat, a Sphinx, any of the cards we're going to later talk about, any of those, then Gigantis will be live. If it's destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, you destroy all spell and traps on the field, which can work out in your favor if you do this before you set your trap cards in the first place. You can wipe theirs if their monster's too big, then set your own spells and traps after.
I can confirm. We did a duel just before this deck profile, and Gigantus allowed him to come back into the game. He destroyed like a skill drain, some other floodgates that I had, and a field spell. It was disgusting.
Moving on to the remaining Sphinxes of the deck, got 2 copies of Guardian Sphinx. Probably the best Sphinx out of the 3 that we've got, because if you can change it to face down defense position, if it's in attack mode or face up defense, and then when it's slip summoned, you return everything, all monsters your opponent controls to their hand, which, is pretty good. It's non-targeting removal if it stays alive. And obviously, even if it gets attacked, provided it stays alive, you can then flip face down, flip it back up into attack mode, which bounces everything, attack for 1700, and if you got Mrs. Radiant out, it's even bigger. You get the idea. And then the final Sphinx, Hurricane Sphinx, simply says your opponent cannot select a face-down defense position monster as an attack target. This effect doesn't really come up unless you've got like a set Cryo Sphinx that you want to keep until a later point. But other than that, this almost never comes up because the only cards you're ever really going to set are going to be Fossil Diner and Giant Rat, both of which you want them to flip face up, unless you already have a board that you don't want screwed over. And then the final cards, we're running 2 copies of Quacky Mirror Overload. Basically, all the Quacky Mirrors that we're running have an effect that applies while it's on the field. So in this case, Overload, during each player's turn, when your opponent would special summon a monster, you contribute it to negate the summon, and if you do, destroy it. So it negates summons. It's simple as that, really. 2 copies of Sandman. This one negates traps. And 2 copies of Wall. This one negates spells. All of them, at the end of phase, have to reveal a rock type in hand, but thankfully, 99% of the deck is rock types. So we don't normally end up having just a Quacky Mirror on the board and no rocks in hand. It's generally covered. Finally, 1 copy of Max C, because it's Max C. Free draw pal.
If you were going to explain Max C, I was going to actually just drop that from the video. Like, there's no one that needs to be explained why Max C is good. And if you...
You got something to say?
I was going to say, and if you do, why on earth are you watching a deck profile with a Max C in it?
1 copy of Book of Moon for the spells. By the way, that was 22 monsters total. So for the spells, we've got 1 Book of Moon, because there are cards in this that we want face down, so Book of Moon helps with that, and there are also cards we want to flip their opponent's face down. So all of those end up working in our favour. Triple Pot of Desires, consistency. We want to draw into our different cards, and we don't really mind what gets banished. There's no real cards in here that are like, oh my god, if I lose it, it's the end of the goal. Even if we banish the 1 copy of Exxod or cards like that, it does.
Hey, just...
In the duel. 3 copies of Scapegoat. Go on.
Sorry, you cut out for a second. Continue.
It's fine. 3 copies of Scapegoat. This card's amazing because we're in link format, which means this will get you out 2 Mrs. Radiance on your turn after you use it on your opponent's end phase, which is actually really, really good.
When you actually remember it.
Mrs. Radiance, when you remember to activate it, unlike me. But 2 Mrs. Radiance is 1,000 attack for every Earth monster that you've got on the field, including themselves, which is actually really, really good because it turns all of your weaker Earth types into really strong ones. Fossil Diner becomes a 2200, Gigantus a 20. Gigantus and all the Quacky Mirrors become 2900s. Hierarchy Sphinx comes a 3400, so you can pretty much beat over anything, provided you scapegoated. So that's something you can do. 1 copy of the Monarch Stormforth, because you can Stormforth your opponent's monster in order to summon a Guardian Sphinx, which you can then set face down once it's summoned, or a Hydra Sphinx, or a Cryo Sphinx. Any of those 3, you can just use Stormforth to remove a problematic monster and get a Sphinx on your field. 2 copies of Twin Twister, because we don't like back row. We don't want to be interrupted. Simple as.
Exactly.
That's it for the spells.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the Scapegoat that I just noticed.
Mm-hmm.
How come you're not running the combo that nets you 3 extra monster zones and a +1, as well as the ability to take away 1 of your opponent's cards on the field?
Because I don't.
Fair enough.
I just choose not to. But I do know about that combo. That was it for the spells, which is 8 of them. Moving on to the traps, you've got 1 copy of Bottomless Trap Hole, because it's Bottomless Trap Hole and I had a space to fill. 2 copies of Lose One Turn. Lose One Turn's alright. It's a decent floodgate to have, because if you draw it on your opening hand and you have something like a giant rat or a fossil diner, it's going to at least help you out. It's not the greatest because of link format. Obviously, with links being summoned, they can't be switched to defense modes, but the effects are still negated for that turn, which does slow them down a little bit depending on what's summoned. Even something like a double helix if it's summoned is negated by lose 1 turn for that turn, which prevents them from going off.
For that turn.
But for that turn. And then hopefully on your turn you can then beat over that helix however you see fit. But yeah, it's decent. You know, there isn't really much else I would swap this out for. For the Solemns, just got 1 copy of Strike and 1 copy of Warning. I thought about running more Strikes, honestly. But I find, actually, sometimes I want to attack into my opponent's monsters that are higher, with things like Giant Rat, with Gigantus, that kind of thing. So the life points can kind of sometimes get tight, and as a result, I didn't want to run too many of the Solemns. You could swap out the lose 1 turns for 2 extra Solemn Strikes and still be fine. You could do it, that's fine. But for now, I was just running the 2 Solemns. You know, they're good enough, they get the job done. And then the final card, 3 copies of Storming Mirror Force, because we want our opponent to attack into our stuff and then bounce them back, or if it's something we want them to attack into, like a Giant Rat or a Fossil Diner, then we just let it go through and we keep the Mirror Force for later. But it's just a good card to keep us alive for an extra turn, or disrupt my opponent from having these massive boards and then send them all back to hand. I prefer Storming over Quaking for the simple fact that Quaking doesn't affect Link monsters.
And also, that thing was really annoying earlier to my Malefic Cyber and Dragon.
Yeah. Should I do side deck or extra deck next?
I say do the extra deck and then side. If you want to explain it, you're free to explain it.
Okay. Extra deck, it's mainly a rank 4 toolbox plus Link monsters. I did think about running Glot Bulb, Natria Beast, and Natria Barkion. They are all possible cards you can make in this deck, and that would be fine. You could also run Black Rose Dragon, because the Sphinxes are level 5 and 6s, so you could do that. But pretty much, if you're going to run that Glot Bulb stuff, you'd also have to consider running Foolish Burial to get in the grave, and then you run into multiple cards being over 40, so you'd have to think about what you want cut out for that. But again, entirely possible to do.
And I think my mandatory cut pot desires for the engine works.
Yeah. So, Abyss Dweller, standard. Keg Organ, I run it because Masterpiece, just redirecting their target. You know, that's something you can do.
I think you should probably explain the interaction when it's not affected by monster effects.
Basically, Keg Organ does not affect the monster itself. It just sets a new target for what Masterpiece is targeting originally. It doesn't affect Masterpiece in a way that would then interact with the continuous effect that it currently has.
And there you go, kids. The more you know.
1 copy of Castell. 1 copy of Dark Rebellion. Cowboy, because burn. 101, Space. Simple enough. Go Goliath. In case you don't know what this does, all monsters you control gain 800 defense, including itself, so it's a 2k defense wall, but it's also got 2500 attack, so you can normally put in attack. And then you can detach, then target 1 level 4 Earth monster in your grave, add it to your hand, and you can use that once per turn. So it'll get back your Fossil Diners, it gets back your Gigantes, it gets back any of your Quackymiros. You know, so it's just decent to have as an option to go into. If you need Gigantes back in hand and you've already used it, then you can do that. And then 1 copy of Air Dragon for back row removal. And then Link monsters, we've just got 2 copies of Decode Talker and 3 copies of Mrs. Radiant. Yeah. I think the only time I'm ever going to update this lineup of links is when Code Talker is released. I might put in a copy of 2 of Code Talker, and take out a decode
Okay,
talker because I don't find myself going into decode.
can I
But
make a quick suggestion?
sure,
And that would be to add in like a proxy dragon or like maybe a link spider and or
I would not run proxy
uh,
because there's no
let me
point.
go ahead and
I
finish.
would not
Instead of you
run.
can go ahead and go into barrel load dragon if you wanted to instead of having the Deku talker,
Yeah,
which you can't really go
I,
into with tokens.
that is entirely possible. I can go in the barrel load, but 2 links by a proxy and barrel load from the scapegoat. That's entirely possible to do. And again, I might consider running that. I haven't made up mind. Extra wise, I like a lot of rank 4s because it gives me a lot of utility in what I want to do, depending on what I'm faced with. I could do that though. I'm planning to cut out a Decode Talker for Code Talker because I don't like Akashic Magician enough to run it right now. I'm going to use Code Talker instead when it comes out. And then I may consider also running the Double Link Spider proxy in order to make Power Load. That's entirely an option.
So do you want to go over anything in your side deck, or do you think it's just kind of there in case
Yeah,
people want to use it?
I mean, there are legitimate reasons I've got a side deck that I recently put together because I've been meaning to put one together. So, onto the side deck, you've got Triple Barrier Statue of the Drought. I've recently started playing copies of the barrier statues in different decks I play. Like I've got the Torrent one in Dynamis, for example, which I've been using for a while. These are actually just really nice to have depending on your matchup. If you're against a deck that is not an Earth type, so random example, Mermail, this card ends up being actually quite useful to you because they can't special summon while this is on the field. Obviously, they can try and beat over it, but then you've got cards to deal with that, Stormy Mirror Forces, Book of Moon, things like that. You have ways of dealing with it. Plus, again, double Business Radiant out on the field, this becomes a 2000 beat stick. So that's all well and good.
You want to go over the Magical Spring next? I don't think people need to explain Dark Hole and Regeki.
Like all Geki both vibes. Magical Spring, this is in case you come across any pendulum deck. Basically how Magical Spring works, you draw cards equal to the number of face-up spell and traps your opponent controls, and then discard equal to the number of face-up spell and traps you control, which will always be a minimum of 1 because Magical Spring does include itself evenly matched. And then until the end of your opponent's next turn after this card resolves, spell and traps your opponent controls cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect. Also, the activation of effects. The activation and effects cannot be negated. So, what's an interesting interaction with Magical Spring, especially in a meta matchup such as the Pendulum Magicians, is that it prevents your opponent from popping the Magicians to get their effects off. They can still use the effects, such as Purple Poison and Double Iris and Black Fang and all that, but they can't destroy them to then get their monster effects off in the Pendulum Zone until the end of their turn. If you activate this during their turn, if you've said it, then they can't do it until the end of the next turn of their next turn after it was activated, which ends up being the rest of that turn, your turn, and then the following turn.
So
There's a
basically,
lot of
by the
time where they
time the
can't
game is
destroy.
over.
By the time the game's over, this card will be. The only thing you have to watch out for with Magical Spring in using it against your opponent is whether or not they have Time Pendulum on the board. Because obviously Time Pendulum it can't be destroyed, so you get to send an additional to the grave. That's the only downside of Magical Spring in the Pendulum Magician matchup. But then in any other Pendulum matchup, like Ignite, Dynamist, I'm just naming random Pendulum decks here, Metal Foe, all manner of those. Metal Foe particularly, actually. Metal Foes have to destroy themselves to get their card effects off. Magical Spring prevents that. It's just an all-round good draw power card. Gives you a few cards. You only have discard 1. Discard something you don't want. 3 copies of System Down. This is mainly for any machine deck you come across, specifically things like ABC, Cyber Dragons, all that manner of stuff. It's just System Down gets rid of them and puts them in a bad spot. 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier. I really don't need to explain this card. It's Dimensional Barrier. It pretty much is anything that isn't links. And then Soul Drain, because Soul Drain stops graveyard effects and banished effects, which is pretty common. You know, things like Spiral Quick Fix, for example, even though that recently got hit.
Trust me, that's still going to be
Negated by
relevant.
this.
That's still going to be relevant to an extent.
Oh yeah, but like, yeah, it's just a good floodgate to have. I need to put in the extra space.
And I guess you got timed out, so I think that with that, we're just going to go ahead and call this video to a close. You have anything else you want to tell our viewers that they might need to know, or anything they want to know?
Um, this is just a straightforward build. Obviously, you can modify this however you want, and as long as you keep kind of generic ratios the same, so triple fossil, probably 2 or 1 of each of the Sphinxes, you're pretty much good to go. You can put in more floodgates if you want, and put in more counter traps, things like that. But the build that I've got currently right now is just good enough.
Okay, well, thank you, petercob, for coming on here with me today. So, everyone, if you want to go ahead and get any advice, this is petercob from Dueling Book. This has been a Sphinx deck profile, and I'm Alexis, and I'm signing out. If you're gonna say anything, say it. Okay.